RT coming to you live from the Russian capital. 16 minutes past the hour now. The UK's main political parties have agreed to create an independent body to regulate the press. The new watchdog will have powers to impose million-pound fines and demand publishers apologise to the victims of press scandals. Let's now get some reaction from investigative journalist Tony Gosling, who joins us from Bristol. Tony, a lot of political debate over this. The decision comes in the wake of the Leveson inquiry, which revealed that journalists hacked thousands of phones. Will this new body actually help prevent those sort of scandals in the future now?
Well, we'll see, because I think apologies are not really what's necessary. I think in cases like phone hacking, what should have happened was the proprietors should have been stopped from being a newspaper proprietor at all. I mean, we saw such massive criminal activity going on within these newsrooms. There's a very good case to say that that person, in fact the Murdoch empire, should have been completely closed down. And let's not forget that this was all prompted by something, the phone hacking scandal, which actually was a failure in policing. The police had the evidence. The hundreds of phones had been hacked, and yet they didn't act on it. So in a way, this whole idea of regulating the press is an important thing to do, but it started with an inquiry which actually was a failure in policing. But I mean, it will be interesting to see if a royal charter pans out as anything different to the other sorts of press regulation we've got. Of course, the problem is going to be who is on the panels that's deciding on this press regulation, because whether it's the BBC or Ofcom at the moment, you've got people on those panels who are essentially from the establishment, appointed by the establishment. The BBC's trust is chaired by Chris Patten, who's a former senior Conservative cabinet minister. And of course that infects a lot of the regulation that's going on within the BBC, to have somebody like that in charge of regulating it. With Ofcom, they are doing a lot of other broadcasting regulation in Britain. You've got a situation where, for example, their consumer panel on Ofcom is supposed to represent consumers, but actually it's been chosen by Odgers, which is a corporate non-executive headhunting firm. That's a real serious problem. The other thing, of course, with Ofcom is that they've actually banned Press TV from the British airwaves. So what we're seeing is actually an establishment type regulation, which is really what we don't need. If this is going to work, it's got to have journalists regulating and victims regulating.
What about the press, though, the reaction by the press at the moment? I understand that the organisation Hacked Off, which is representing the victims of that phone hacking scandal, they're happy with the news of this. But what about the press?
Well, I don't think Hacked Off necessarily represent all the victims. They seem to represent, it seems to me, more like some of the more high-profile victims. I mean, I'd like to see some of the less well-known victims, people who are fairly obscure, who have been victims of the press over the years, on this panel. So even though Hacked Off seem to be happy with it, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to know what's going to happen until we've seen how this all pans out and who is on that panel.
But in effect, Tony, just to interrupt, you talked about the Ofcom,
yeah.
We've talked about other regulatory bodies. In a way, what you're implying, that these are all being self-regulated. This body, this new one, really needs to be very powerful indeed. And it seems to me you're being a little bit cynical about it, that it's not necessarily the organisation that is needed.
Well, I mean, these things often start off with great intentions, don't they? And you often start with good people on those panels. But what happens often is you have to look at who's appointing people to the panel in the future, and whether it's journalists doing that. I mean, for example, the National Union of Journalists here in Britain had to fight to even be close to the process to put this together. And now the General Secretary of the National Union of Journalists, Michelle Stanistreet, has actually come out, at least on Friday anyway, in the original proposals, against this. She's saying, well, journalists need to be on that panel. And of course they do. Journalists are at the cutting edge, and it's not the journalists that have caused these problems, it's the proprietors and the editors of these firms. So if it's not going to have journalists on the panel, if it's not going to have some of the, shall we say, less establishment and well-known victims, I think the whole thing may slowly turn into another establishment fix-up, as has happened at Ofcom and at the BBC.
Live from Bristol, investigative journalist Tony Gosling, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts and for your time.
Thank you.
Iraq is about to mark 10 years since the US-led invasion, with at least 50 people killed since last week in suicide bombings across the country. In 2003, Washington unleashed its shock and awe airstrikes, aiming to rid the country of suspected weapons of mass destruction and topple Saddam Hussein. A decade later, arguments persist over whether anything was achieved. Marty's Khan investigates.
There's no greater cost to war than shattered human lives.